Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors, and I welcome any community members out there who have joined us today. I formally declare open this meeting of Colac Otway Shire Council to consider business carried over from our meeting on the 28th of February 2024, which was adjourned at item, 9.13. I have previously called for declarations of conflict unless any councillors have altered their view on conflict, so I will consider that complete. Can I please check any apologies? No, I can see that we're all here. Now we will move on to the item of business where we left off the other day, and that's item 9.13, and it was the Apollo Bay bushfire place of last resort. We'd had got through the questions, and now I'm making sure that all the questions have been answered and we can move on to the motion. Councillor Costin.
Sorry, Mayor, I jumped in before you asked if any council would like to move a motion. I would like to move an alternate motion, thank you.
Thank you.
If we could have that up on the screen.
Up on the screen. Can you confirm for us, Councillor Costin, that that's the motion you want to put before us?
Yes, thank you. It just adds an additional point 5 that makes it clear that council support the local CFA and the community voice in their preference to retain the existing site.
Thank you, Councillor Costin. Do I have a seconder?
I have my hand up.
Councillor Potter.
3 up there, but I think Chris was up first.
Yeah, Councillor Potter, thank you. Councillors, by show of hands, please indicate if anyone opposes the motion. By show of hands, please indicate if you wish to speak to the motion. Thank you. I will now ask the mover, Councillor Costin, to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mayor. This is effectively a retrospective endorsement of an officer's decision taken some months ago. It's a decision that's left Apollo Bay without a bushfire place of last resort over this current fire season. That decision was forced along by a Southwest Region CFA annual assessment that found the existing foreshore site was non-compliant with the stringent requirements of a bushfire place of last resort. The reason for the non-compliance was the growth of vegetation alongside the pathways through the sand dunes along the east side of the foreshore. This issue of non-compliance came somewhat as a surprise to councillors, to the local CFA and to the various community fire-ready groups. But it really shouldn't have been a surprise given that the CFA assessors had previously advised that of the risk of non-compliance due to vegetation growth. So on a personal level, I'd like to apologise to the Apollo Bay and surrounding community because it appears that we, council, have dropped the ball in our oversight of this critical task. Our officers were unable to secure an agreement from GORCAPA to reduce the vegetation, and we didn't have an alternate site ready to go. This has left the Apollo Bay and surrounding community and our many national and international visitors unacceptably vulnerable in the face of a catastrophic bushfire. And in the near future, I'll be seeking council agreement to implement an approach that ensures council has better visibility of these emergency management matters that are critical to the safety of our community. At the time of the CFA advice, our CEO indicated a preference to retain the existing site because this was the quickest, easiest and cheapest way to ensure a bushfire place of last resort in Apollo Bay over this fire season. This is also the preference of the local CFA and the community. This site is centrally located. It has water, toilets and is adjacent to the surf club, which is the designated place for emergency community communications. Anyone who's left their property on an extreme fire risk day goes to the surf club to find out what's happening. So it just seems logical and eminently sensible to retain the existing site, but Gorkappa haven't yet agreed to the proposed vegetation reduction or remediation. And so here we are today, forced to retrospectively rubber stamp a decommissioning in accordance with Council's designated role under our emergency management plan. But in this additional point 5 to the officer recommendation, we can take the opportunity to express a position that supports our CEO's view, the view of the local CFA, and the view of the Apollo Bay Community Voice to undertake remedial works so that the existing foreshore bushfire place of last resort can be recommissioned. Thank you all.
Councillor Costin. Councillor Potter as seconder.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, Councillor Costin has summed it up pretty well. We were instructed to decommission this area, so we have to. The Apollo Bay foreshore is a common sense place of bushfire, place of last resort. To those tourists, many of whom are non-English speaking, if they have to flee the hills or they're travelling on the Great Ocean Road, they naturally will gravitate to this area. So whilst I understand we're looking at a different place, I get that, but I'm hoping that Gorkappa will come to the party if they can and remove some vegetation, restore the preference for the foreshore as a bushfire place of last resort. Thanks, Mayor.
Councillor Potter. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I think that Councillor Costin has summarised it very well, but I think I really need to express my disappointment in how this matter has been handled. I think the comment made by Councillor Costin that effectively we're retrospectively rubber stamping a decision that's already been made is a pretty good summary on what has occurred here. From what I understand, the current site is the preferred site, and it did satisfy the requirements. The vegetation has obviously grown over the years. We're not talking here about having to clear fell a native forest. We're talking about vegetation that was suitable and could coexist, but has now grown a bit and just needs to be cut back. I think it's disappointing that we don't have any information about the extent of the works required, the cost. I did ask some questions at the council meeting on Wednesday, and I certainly have no clear understanding from the information that has been provided to councillors what the problem is in terms of where the hold-up is other than Gorkappa. But that still doesn't tell us how much it would cost to do the necessary works. And I'll support Councillor Costin's resolution mainly because of point 5. It expresses a preference for retaining the current site, but I really question the merits and sense when councillors are called on to retrospectively rubber stamp a decision which has effectively already been made. It's not a good state of affairs, to say the least.
Councillor Hart. Councillor Arnott, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor White. Yeah, look, I also support Councillor Costin's motion as seconded by Councillor Potter, and to reiterate his words of concern about this retrospective rubber stamping of something. It just seems to be quite an extraordinary thing that we're being forced to look at other places around the town before we can actually clear this vegetation to what has become expected of its community as being a natural place to go to. It seems to me that what they're doing is putting the welfare of a few scrubby old bushes that have grown by accident on the foreshore there, the safety of those bushes ahead of the safety of the people of Apollo Bay. And quite frankly, I don't think that's good enough. The community deserves a better consideration than that, and this whole process is quite bureaucratic and unnecessary. We should be able to appropriately keep that place available for the community. As we said, it's a natural place for them to go to. even notwithstanding all the communications from the CFA in the meantime and not diminishing their excellent work they do, it's likely that people would default under pressure, go to there anyway. And so we need to make sure it's the appropriate place for them. The cost to do this, I hear Councillor Hart, but I don't think it'd be substantial to cost to keep it clear. So I think this last point really drives home our concerns around that. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Sorry, Mayor, was that myself?
Yes, Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm rising to support Councillor Costin's motion. I think it makes a lot of sense. The reality is as others have pointed out, we've been told to essentially retrospectively rubber stamp decommissioning of the foreshore. This is despite it being a natural place for people to gravitate towards if there is a fire. Now, to me, it's a disappointment that Gore Kappa have pushed back against the will of the community yet again, as well as Council's view that foreshore is the safest place for them. I think Councillor Arnott's said it best in that the interests of a few bits of scrub which have grown by accident are being put ahead of the interests of human beings who may seek to escape bushfires. And I'd also like to note that, just on a further view, that we've seen some of the Shire's most significant bushfire danger rating days of the year over the past week. And in addition to Apollo Bay now no longer having a bushfire place of last resort, other large populations in our Shire, including Carl River, Uruwalappi, Labours Hill, Johanna and more, areas situated within the Otway Ranges which are extraordinarily susceptible to burning and hard to escape in the event of a bushfire. We don't have places of last resort there, and I feel that we need to rectify this as soon as possible, and hopefully with the help of state and federal governments, to ensure that everyone across our Shire has somewhere to go in the event of a bushfire, because we are in a place that will, unfortunately, just by the way of our natural habitat, will go up if we go up, unfortunately. So thank you, Councillor Costin, for moving this alternative, and I'll be supporting it gladly.
Councillor Finnegan. Any other councillors? No other councillors? Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? Physical hands up. Thank you. Against? Carried. I've got to put my hand up, sorry. Carried 7. The motion is carried. 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, 9.14, social housing at 36 to 42 Bruce Street. And the purpose of this report is to inform councillors of the response from TW Projects to the council resolution of 13 December 2023 regarding the provision of social housing at 36 to 52 Bruce Street. Councillors, before I ask for a motion, do any councillors wish to ask a question of officers? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor. I have several questions on this matter. There was a question by a member of the public, and I thought it was stated at an earlier meeting dealing with this. Is it the case that the developer plans to sell these blocks of land to the housing provider for about $100,000 each, or a
Mr. McNeil, can you answer that one?
Through you, Mayor. I think Councillor Hart might have been caught frozen mid-question, but I think the question, as I heard it, was about whether the developer is selling the 3 blocks of land to the social housing provider, and I can confirm that the developer has indicated that would be the case, that it would be for probably a little bit just under 100,000 per lot, which would be a discounted rate from what the market price would be of approximately $300,000 a lot.
Thanks, Mr. McNeil. Councillor Arnott, you have a question? Councillor Arnott, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor White. My understanding is that the proposal that TW Projects has put through is consistent with the contract. Is that correct?
Neil?
Through you, Mayor. Yes, we believe that the proposal of TW Projects to enter into an arrangement with a social housing provider to develop the housing directly would be compliant with the contract.
Okay, and the future owner of the property would not be TW Projects, it would be the housing provider.
Before you go to another council.
Mr McNeil?
Through you, Mayor. Certainly the developer would be making arrangements for the transfer of the land, the 3 lots, to the social housing provider, who would then develop the lots and own them ongoing.
Okay. And we're comfortable that the social housing provider fits the our preferred model for that process.
Through you, Mayor, the Housing Choices is a very well-respected provider of social housing, and so certainly in the discussions that we've had about this proposal, officers are comfortable that they would be a suitable provider of social housing for this site. And obviously they have an interest in providing social housing as their core business in maintaining this land for that purpose for a reasonable period of time.
Okay, if I may beg another question, please, Mayor. The social housing provider, are they comfortable with this arrangement with TW Projects? To your knowledge?
Through you, Mayor, to my knowledge, there is an agreement in principle between the 2 parties that they are comfortable with.
Thank you.
The arrangement. Just before we move on, I just want to check in with Councillor Hart. Can you hear us, Councillor Hart?
Yes, Mayor, and I have several questions.
Okay.
So far, I've only heard answers to Councillor Arnott's questions, and am I going to be allowed to ask questions or not, please?
Yes, you're definitely going to be allowed to ask questions. We just lost you there for a little minute and now you're back. So it wasn't that we weren't going to ignore that. We just lost you there for a minute. Councillor Finnegan had his hand up and then it's you, Councillor Hart. Councillor Finnegan.
I'm happy to defer to Councillor Hart while fresh in his mind, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. Councillor Hart.
Mayor, I'm going to try to get all the questions out so we can try to get some answers on this issue, please. My question was, and I think it was raised at a previous council meeting and it's been raised by a member of the public in the question time. Is it the case that the developer will be selling these blocks to these housing authority for $100,000 a block or thereabouts, and therefore around $300,000? The next question I have is does the contract preclude a minimum period that these houses must be retained for social housing? And isn't it the case that in the absence of that, the housing provider would be quite free to sell the property at any time? And isn't it the case that the contract requires council to approve the arrangement? And that in that sense, whilst the arrangement between the housing provider and the developer is their arrangement, council does have input into it in that it requires council approval, which is exactly what we're being asked to do today, effectively.
Mr McNeil.
Through you, Mayor, that was 4 questions and I'll try to answer all of them. The first one was about the whether the lots were to be sold to the social housing provider, and that answer to that is we understand that they would be. We understand that that cost would be approximately just under $100,000 per lot, which would be a heavily discounted rate to the market price. And I did miss the second question, Stephen, if you're able to clarify that.
That's all right. So $100,000 a lot, which is $300,000, give or take a couple of dollars for transaction fees, I assume. So 300,000.
3 lots at 100,000 or thereabouts each, 300,000. Yeah.
Thank you. So in terms of a minimum period that these houses must remain as social housing, is there anything in the contract that precludes council specifying a minimum period? That was one of the questions. There were quite a few others.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor. There's no, under the contract, there's no requirement for there to be any minimum period specified. So that the contract provides two options as to how the social housing would be provided. One is that the lots are provided at no cost to council, and the other is that the developer can enter into an arrangement with a social housing provider to develop the housing for that purpose. If that latter option was chosen, as is proposed in this instance, the contract doesn't provide any requirement or obligation on the social housing provider or the developer about the length of time that they would be retained as social housing, and that therefore there's no trigger, if you like, in the contract for council to impose a requirement in that regard. Officers have talked to the developer about the potential for Section 173 agreement under the Planning and Environment Act to be entered into that might give some guarantee about that for a period of time, recognising that this is an issue of interest to councillors and the community.
Isn't it correct that that the contract, nor whether it requires it or doesn't require it, it certainly does not stop us from having that requirement? The contract doesn't say there'll be no such requirement.
Through you, Mayor, the contract doesn't refer to there being a need for any minimum period, and I don't believe that council has the ability to impose that requirement through a resolution on them. What I indicated in my previous response was that officers have initiated discussions with the developer about whether they'd be prepared to enter into an agreement voluntarily, and it's through those discussions that has led to the recommendation to councillors on this matter that an agreement be entered into.
And my other two questions, which I'll get them out, but I'm happy to remember them and I'll repeat them as how many times I have to. If you don't have a minimum requirement, isn't it the case that legally the housing authority could just sell the properties off in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whenever they like, with no reference to council, and nothing stopping them from doing that?
Through you, Mayor, if there's nothing in place through, say, a Section 173 agreement, then yes, once developed for social housing and implemented in that way, technically it would be possible for that social housing provider to sell the housing and cease the use for social housing. But given that the social housing provider their core business is about providing and increasing the amount of housing available for people who are eligible for social housing, it's extremely unlikely that that would occur.
So the other questions I had, one of them wasn't, isn't it the case that we as a council have to accept the arrangement that is being entered into, and therefore, do we have to sign off on it or not? I mean, because if we do, then we do have input into this process. So it's a yes, no question. Does this requirement require council to approve whatever the arrangement is?
There's no requirement under the contract of sale for council to approve the choice of how the developer might go about making an arrangement with a social housing provider.
No, I don't think you're answering the question with all due respect. The question is, do we have to approve that they have met the requirements of the contract by doing some sort of arrangement? And I mean, if the answer is, well, then what are we doing here? What are we doing here with a resolution to approve it if we're not required to? But the other question I'd like to have, please, and this hopefully will be my final question on this issue at this time, although I think there's a lot of questions that need to be asked about this. My final question is, will this provide social housing for low income people, or is it only for a narrow class of people, very important class of people, and that is that people who require disability housing as distinct from people who may have low incomes, but not be disabled as such.
Through you, Mayor. The answer to that first part of the question was the reason that officers put a report to council on this matter was because the developer was looking to enter into an arrangement with Disability Housing Limited, which in itself isn't a registered social housing provider, but is a subsidiary of Housing Choices, which is. And we were seeking council's endorsement on the basis that the contract refers to it being a registered social housing provider. The developer has a choice as to entering into that agreement directly with Disability Housing Limited, or an option for them is to just enter into an arrangement with Housing Choices. If the arrangement was with Housing Choices and not Disability Housing Limited, then this wouldn't require any resolution of council.
So through you, Mayor, minutes ago we were told it didn't require sign-off by council. Now we're being told it does, because dealing with the disability group does not comply with the contract. Is that what I'm hearing, and therefore requires council approval?
Through you, Mayor, I'm seeking to make sure that there's a full understanding of what the answer I gave, that the choice of the developer to enter into a direct arrangement with another social housing provider to meet their obligations doesn't require council sign-off. But the reason we are seeking a council resolution on this is because they are not proposing to enter into a legal arrangement with a registered housing provider in Disability Housing Limited, although it is a subsidiary of a registered housing provider.
Thank you, Mr. McNeil. Councillor Finnegan, you've got your hand up. You have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question, and that response is probably just brought up another one, as I can possibly see a couple other councillors' minds ticking over. I guess I'll come back to the genesis of this, the genesis per se of this issue in asking this question, and just going to seek a bit of background as I'm asking the question. As I understand it, councillors were under the impression of, and indeed the Colac Herald reported at the time of the sale to TW of Bruce Street two TW projects, that 3 social housing lots would be provided at no cost. And that's something I saw reported, and something upon speaking to other councillors indeed is, I believe, on the record from a recent council meeting whereby we voted on a resolution around Bruce Street to be the case. Now, given this is the case, how did it come to be that another option was written into the contract for the developer, enabling the developer to sell these blocks off at a cost of around $300,000?
Through you, Mayor. Officers have worked collaboratively with councillors on this project over a number of years, and before the sale, there was discussion with councillors about the options in the contract that would be offered. And as I've indicated in previous answers, there was 2 options that ended up being provided. One was for lots to be provided free of charge to council, and council would then seek to deal with a housing provider to supply that housing. Or the other option being that the developer enter into an agreement directly with the housing provider. Now, there was nothing in the contract of sale that referred to those lots being provided at no cost to that housing provider directly, and therefore the developer has pursued this option under that clause, which doesn't make any provision for that to be at no cost.
Thank you very much, Mr. McNeil. I'll come back to the question though. So initially, the understanding was that these blocks would be provided free to council, and that was the understanding of councillors, and that indeed that option was in the contract, but there was also another option there for enabling TW projects to sell these 3 lots off to a disability services provider if they entered into an agreement themselves. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor. Sorry, I'm not quite sure of the question. Can you just re-put that to me?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. McNeil. So the initial, as I said, the initial understanding was that these 3 lots, the understanding of council is that the 3 social housing lots would be provided free back to council, and we could go and partner with who we wanted or gift them to an organisation, or, you know, the expectation may have been even that TW Projects would recommend someone to us and we could just go, bang, here you go. Now, given that that's the case, I'm just failing to understand how it ended up in the contract that there was another option there which enabled the developer to go, okay, we're going to partner with these people ourselves, when it doesn't seem that that was the position of councillors at the time that this sale came up.
It's Councillor Finnegan. I think the CEO wants to make a comment on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologise, I'm speaking through the Mayor's speaker. Hopefully people can hear me. So we acknowledge that there is an issue here, and I will just try and hopefully help to just simplify things. The council report on page 320 of the agenda includes the 2 points that are extracted from the contract of sale, and those 2 points highlight or explain how the purchaser of the Bruce Street property was expected to deliver a social housing outcome. One is through 3 lots being transferred to council for social housing. Sorry, this is not the full point. The contractors say at no cost to council. The second option is to develop 3 social housing dwellings in partnership with a registered housing agency within 18 months of statement compliance being provided. There isn't a mechanism in the contract for council to approve which of those 2 options TW Projects elects to use. It just is required to use one or the other. The wording in the contract for the 2 options is exactly the same as the wording in the resolution that council had through which giving our instruction. We have translated that exactly from the resolution to the contract, but we acknowledge that what has become clear in the last few months is that we as officers did not get enough specificity in the second point of that resolution. The first point was very clearly saying at no cost to council. The second point, whilst also would be at no cost to council, we didn't get the specificity that says at no cost to the housing provider. And we have learned from that, but it is not in the resolution, and therefore it did not flow through to the contract. And that is something that unfortunately means we are where we are. We have a contract that can be complied with by TW Projects without approval unless they deviate from those 2 points. Because TW Projects is trying to use the second mechanism of partnering with a registered housing provider through the subsidiary instead of directly, officers felt that that was not consistent enough and we wanted council approval, and therefore we came to the chamber to see if council was satisfied that the subsidiary was an appropriate mechanism to get that outcome instead of directly with Housing Choices Australia. TW Projects could comply with the contract by just engaging directly with Housing Choices Australia. They would prefer not to, but that's their choice. So I acknowledge that the first point, very, very clear. We understood exactly what was expected from council. The second point in the resolution and therefore in the contract was silent on whether land should be gifted or not. And we are regretting that, but that's the situation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And did you have a follow-up question, Councillor Finnegan?
Yes. So given that, and I appreciate that background, CEO, and I appreciate what you've had to say there and clarifying the situation for us. And I think it is of use to us as councillors to hear that. I guess the question I have now is that with what TW Projects is proposing to do now, in that they're not going directly through the disability housing provider and are wanting to go through a subsidiary which doesn't comply with the contract, we would be within our rights to veto that and vote it down, would we not? And
I'll respond.
Yeah.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll respond. Council could resolve that it does not recognise the subsidiary to be a satisfactory body to comply with the second point in the contract. That's what you could do.
Yep.
Council could resolve that it does not recognise Disability Housing Limited as an appropriate representative of a registered housing provider for this purpose.
Thank you, Celia.
And could we, on that basis, could council, as we have in the past, resolved and expressed to TW projects via a resolution that they go with the option of providing the 3 lots to council free of charge? Would we, and obviously TW projects have said they prefer not to do that and go down the option they are now, if we were to resolve not to recognise Disability Housing Limited in this contract in such a way, could we also go back to, in that resolution, ask the question that go back to TW projects, again, state a preference that if they were willing to hand over those properties free of charge, our decision may change.
So through the chair, I'll respond. There's nothing that precludes council from repeating its former request.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. Councillor Hart, have you got your hand up there?
Yes, Mayor. Now that I thank Councillor Finnegan for their questions, it's been crystal clear that this requires our approval. I'm foreshadowing that I have an alternative resolution to move. That'll be, I'm happy when you're ready, I'll go through it, but it will have the effect that we, well, it'll call on the developer to do what they're required under the contract. But I'll give you words when you're ready for it.
I'll just wind up the questions first and then I'll ask for a motion. So have I got any further questions or no further questions? Okay. Councillors, the officers have provided a recommendation with the report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move? Councillor Arnott, sorry, you have a question before we get to the motion.
Yes, thank you, Mayor White. I appreciate the opportunity to ask the question. I was a little bit slow putting my hand up. Do we as a council have detailed information on what the greatest social housing needs are in Colac, i.e. low income, disability services housing or whatever? Do we have any stats on that as an entity ourselves?
Through you,
Mr. McNeil?
Yeah, council did engaged consultant to do a social housing plan in 2021, and that indicated the extent of need across the Shire for social housing. And it was indicated to be quite a significant need, and it did identify there's a range of different parts of the community that would benefit from social housing, and that includes older age groups and single persons, not the traditional image of how people see people living in social housing. There's a very wide range of people in the community that would benefit from social housing.
Thank you, Mr. McNeil.
Can I have one more question, please?
One more question, Councillor Arnott. We've been on this.
Is this our only? Yeah, I accept that. Is this our only opportunity to offer land for social housing within this town regarding our developments that are moving in play now and going forward?
Mr. McNeil?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, thanks for that question. The report we're talking about today with the land that council has sold at Bruce Street is an effort by council to try and facilitate a social housing outcome directly, but our planning department are talking to a number of other developers, two particularly within Colac, which both have recently land rezoned to support 400 to 500 lots on each of those two sites. And we've ensured that the wording of those planning controls that were introduced does refer to the need for social and affordable housing to be provided through those developments. And we're currently in the process of talking to those developers about what those arrangements might look like and what agreements might be reached, so that as land is released for development, a proportion of dwellings within those new housing estates is provided by social housing providers.
Thanks, Mr. McNeil.
Thank you.
Councillor Potter, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I flag that should Councillor Hart's motion be unsuccessful, I'd like to move a motion, please.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. So we'll go back to, we have a recommendation. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to the matter?
Well, I've foreshadowed I want to move an
Thank
alternative,
you.
Mayor.
Councillor Hart, have we got it up there?
No, I'm making it up as we go, Mayor, and I thank Councillor Finnegan again for drawing this issue out. My motion is that Council 1 notes that the I'm not sure whether you call it developer or whoever, that their preference is to not provide the 3 blocks of land to council. 2, resolves that council has an expectation that the arrangement meets the contract, namely that the alternative is that the developer enters into a partnership with a registered housing agency. 3, the council notes that the suggested disability agency does not meet that requirement. And 4, advises the developer, whatever reference you want to have, of this decision, that they essentially that if they're not going to give us the 3 blocks, then they have to engage with a registered housing agency. And if I get a seconder, then we can debate the thing.
I'll be prepared to second as such.
Thank you. Now we need Councillor Hart to go through that so we can capture the essence of the.
Well,
of the
the first.
Hang on, sorry, Councillor Hart, do you have that written down?
No, CEO. I think that this issue, that what's been suggested, doesn't comply with the contract either. That has just been teased out. So
yeah,
no, I don't have the motion written down.
I didn't know if you'd written it. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll need your assistance then. So you don't have it written down.
So the first point is, so that.
Okay, let's do them one at a time.
Yeah, okay, that council. First point is, notes that the developer, or whatever reference you want to have to the developer, has advised council that they do not wish to provide these 3 blocks of land to council for social housing.
At no cost.
At no cost. That council notes that the developer prefers to enter into arrangement with.
Slow down a little bit, Stephen, because we're trying to type it up as you speak. Sorry.
With the housing provider, and I'm just trying to get the. I'm trying to get the computer up with the whatever it is. Prefers to enter into the arrangement. In fact, instead of developer, you could refer to them as TW Projects Proprietary Limited as per the agenda. And they prefer to enter into an arrangement. Have you got the name of that the other organisation?
Through you, Mayor, it's Disability Housing Limited was the name of the agreement.
Thank you. Which is not a registered housing agency.
Yeah, we just need to pause while we come and catch us up with you, Stephen.
Excuse me, Mayor. I wonder if we could have a short adjournment, 5 minutes
while
it's being worked out.
That might be a good suggestion. I think Councillor Costin, can we
Your
move,
call.
move an adjournment, and we'll get the wording correct before we move on.
5 minutes. Time for a glass of water.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Thank you.
So seconded.
So it's that cancel. You don't need to repeat that cancel in point 2. So point 2 will read, notes that TW Projects Proprietary Limited prefers to enter into an arrangement with DHL, which is not a registered housing provider as required by the contract. So you could put, I would put a comma on it after DHL.
There's 3 points there so far, Stephen.
Well, no, point 1 has repeated that so that council is at the front of the motion. I'm happy to suggest another alternative to you, Mayor. If you prefer, I'm prepared to move that we defer this item and move on to the other items in the agenda. Failing that, I'm happy to continue to go through this process.
I think we're nearly there, Councillor Hart.
Okay.
How many more points?
So the first point is that council notes the developer does not wish to provide, has advised council they do not wish to provide the 3 blocks. I have asked for the word developer to be changed to the wording in the agenda, which is TW Projects, please.
Yeah. On the first point instead of,
Yeah, that looks pretty good for point 1. And then point 2 is notes that TW Projects, again, has advised council that they prefer to enter into an arrangement with DHL, comma, which is not a registered housing provider, and drop the words as required by the contract because it's confusing as to which part isn't. And point 3, that council is already up the front, requests that TW Projects enters into an arrangement with a registered housing agency as required by the contract if they are not prepared to give the blocks of land to council for no cost. Thank you. And point 4 would be, as again, that council is at the front end. So notes council's preference that the housing is kept as social housing for a minimum period of 40 years and that there is a section 173 agreement entered into to that effect. And point 5, that council ask that TW projects be informed of this resolution, whilst noting that it is still council's preference that the land, the 3 blocks, be provided to council for no cost for social housing.
Stephen, is that got the 5 points there?
We're getting close. That council, it's probably request the CEO inform TW projects of this resolution. Sorry to the person who's writing that. So that council requests the CEO advise TW projects of this resolution, noting that it is still council's preference, not requirement, but preference, that the 3 blocks of land are given to council free to be used for social housing.
Okay, so we've got the 5 points there. Are we all back from the break? It's 5 minutes. We've had a 5-minute break.
There's no break, it's all streaming.
Some councillors have taken a break. Okay, so that's the 5 points. Thank you, Councillor Hart.
Mayor, can I just
yeah, Councillor Mr. McNeil.
make a comment? Yeah, that last point, number 5, where it says asks that the CEO advises TW projects, it says B, it needs to have the word advised.
No, just take that bit. Advises TW projects off.
Yeah, just take the B out.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
And in the point 4 above it, the word A is doubled up before section 173 agreement.
Thank you, Mr. McNeil.
And 5 is noting that it's council's preference. So they need some word council's preference. In fact, I think you've put the word still council's preference, but it's not requiring it.
It's preference, not requirement. I can't require, but preference. Mm.
And there's a stray is after the word preference, so that it is still council's preference that the is after preference, and number 5 does not need to be there.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Potter, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just wondering in point 5, where it says that. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Point 5, where it says preference that the 3 blocks of land are given to council free to be used. Just wondering whether that should be free of charge or council, comma.
Yeah, I'm happy with free of charge.
And I also,
Finnegan?
yep, I also have a question. Should it be free of charge as per the particular option in the contract, whatever that was detailed as, or is that deemed unnecessary?
I probably don't think it's necessary because we're talking about preference, and then we'll just get a whole lot of lawyers arguing over what a clause said.
Yeah.
With respect.
Okay. So Councillor Hart's motion is up there. We're clear that's your motion. Councillor Finnegan, you're seconding that motion. Does anyone oppose? No one opposes. Okay. Councillor Hart.
Can I make the point here, Chair, that it's impossible to know whether you're going to oppose a motion until you hear some other people speak at times.
That's it. Thanks, Councillor Arnott. That's the normal process that we take. Councillor Hart, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Hang on, Mayor.
Hang on.
Sorry,
Councillor
Mayor.
Potter.
Yeah, for the sake of the discussion, I'll oppose.
Thank you,
Right,
Councillor
thanks.
Potter.
Okay, can I speak now, please?
Councillor Hart.
Okay. The way this has been handled has been poor, to be quite candid. What I have here is a resolution that does comply with the contract. It complies with the objectives of council, which was to have accommodation for social housing, not restricting it, not seeking it to restrict it to low income earners or people with disabilities, but rather a very broad option that this housing would be available for people who require social housing. This motion does that. The arrangement that TW Projects doesn't do that. It narrows it to one class of people. And we've heard that there's a lot of people who need social housing, whether it be older people, single women in particular, and of course, disabled people. Now we keep getting told time and time again it doesn't require our approval. Then finally, and full marks to Councillor Finnegan, we teased out that the authority that was being suggested by TW Projects doesn't meet the requirements, and from the contract, council's contract with TW Projects, because they're not a registered housing provider. They are a subsidiary that deals with a narrow class of people who may need housing. And again, I don't see why we are confining it to a narrow class of people. It should be more broadly available. So this motion, given the lack of any attempt to resolve this issue, it's a very legalistic approach has been taken. We're saying, well, we're asking you to comply with the contract. Comply with the contract, enter into an arrangement with a registered housing agency. We're still noting here that our preference is that the 3 blocks of land are given to council free of charge, which was the understanding of several councillors at least. And how that didn't happen, I don't know. But point 5 is framed that it doesn't require that to happen. All it requires is that they enter into a contract with a registered housing provider as per the contract. We keep getting told about the contract. Well, how about they comply with the contract too? It also mentions at point 4, our preference, the housing is retained for 40 years. How ridiculous that you could have the situation where this housing could be sold in 1, 2, 5, 10 years' time. It's meant to be there for the benefit of the community. When this property was put up for sale, we indicated a preparedness to accept a slightly lower price if we could get these 3 blocks of land for social housing. Now we're having the situation where we're told that that's not going to happen. Could be just for a few years, maybe 10, maybe 20. Point 4 does not require that that happens, the minimum period be stated or in an agreement. It simply indicates a preference so as to comply with that poorly worded contract that council has entered into. We need to stand up for the community and just not roll over on this. And this motion is a motion that can be put forward in compliant with the contract, as inadequate as it is, simply asking that TW Projects comply with that relevant clause, whilst indicating a few preferences by Colac Otway. We're meant to be doing this for the community, not just to tick it off easily. And so I look forward to some support from other councillors and thank Councillor Finnegan for seconding it.
Councillor Hart, Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I think that we've ended up in this position because something's gone awry something was missed during the stage that the contract was being drawn up and clauses were being drawn up. And I am understanding that these things happen. It's disappointing that this has happened. It's disappointing that we've gotten to this situation whereby it's only just now we've essentially teased out that what TW projects want to do here doesn't actually comply with the contract either. Now, at the time that council sold this land to TW projects, the understanding of councillors, indeed the intention of councillors, and I believe the position of the wider community was that, yes, 3 lots are going to be given free of charge to facilitate a social housing outcome in this shire, in an area where we've got a lot of disadvantaged people who need social housing, and the wider pool of people that would be eligible for that, the better. Somehow we've ended up in a position whereby TW projects have been allowed to essentially say, well, we'd like to sell this land to a social housing provider. What they've proposed to do is to sell this land to a subsidiary of a social housing provider, and that doesn't comply with the contract. Now, I thank Councillor Hart for bringing this alternative motion. I feel it puts the power back in the hands of councillors and gives us another opportunity to say, we want that land. We want that land, so we would prefer that TW Projects gives that land, those 3 blocks of land, to us for free, so we can facilitate a social housing outcome from our end and not have to charge an organisation for it. Now, it also says that whilst expressing that preference, says that we would like TW Projects to comply, advises them that what they want to do doesn't comply with the contract, advises them we would like to see them comply with the contract, and puts in, as I said, it states our preference that the land be transferred back to us, but also notes a preference that housing is kept as social housing for a minimum period of 40 years, and that there is Section 173 agreement to that effect. Now, I think that really we're putting the power back in the hands of councillors here to take a stand on behalf of our community and make it crystal clear that we aren't just a rubber stamp for sort of these things that pop up in retrospect to get these through for whatever reason. Because the reality is that if we hadn't teased this out today, we might have pushed it through without realising that what TW Projects were seeking to do didn't actually comply with the contract, and we could fight back against this. So that's why I'm pushing this, and hopefully we can get the right social housing outcome that we need from the sale of this council-owned land at Bruce Street.
Councillor Finnegan. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Potter. You're on mute, Councillor Potter.
Sorry, I apologise. Yeah, look, I did oppose. I may yet support it. I'm uncomfortable with it, I must admit. I thank the CEO for explaining how we got to the contract that ended up being executed, and you know, there's learnings for councillors and officers out of that. But we currently are in the space where a subsidiary of a registered social housing provider is prepared to purchase the blocks and build housing for a particular cohort of people in the community with disabilities. It's a cohort that is often overlooked, and I fear that we're going to overlook them again by supporting this. I know of people in this space that have been waiting for 2 years for housing, a number of them, not just one person, and here we are kicking it down the road further, and with the potential that these people won't get housing. So that concerns me. I'm also concerned in relation to the 173 agreement for the 40 years. My preference was for 20, could live with 30, but be that as may, if it's 40, how do you have a 1-7 agreement that to lock in a preference? You know, these people are still not compelled, and it's a preference only. Acknowledges councillor's preference for 40 years, but it's a little bit unenforceable and uninspiring, I think. So I'll listen to everyone. No doubt Councillor Hart will sum up very well, Mayor, but that's my view at the moment. I'm concerned that a particular cohort who do get overlooked, that we are going out of our way to overlook them again.
Thanks, Councillor Potter. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mayor White. And I'm not sure whether people can decide whether I'm speaking for or against this motion as I speak, but there's a few things I would like to point out. One, I'd agree with Councillor Potter in his talks that this is a learning experience for the council. To be very clear about the motion wordings that we put forward and to support that where necessary with appropriate worded minutes. I have noted that our minutes, our typed minutes, can tend to be quite brief and not necessarily support the intent behind some of this sort of thing. So maybe we need to look at that. There is no requirement under the Act for our approval on this. The only reason it's back here is because of this change from the under contract. The only reason for it's back here is because they've chosen to, there's this non-registered provider, as we're talking about, going the disability housing. Now, disability housing is owned by Social Housing Australia, and they are the registered provider. The reason you would set up entities like this is so that you can be more flexible as a group to do more things. There's probably a lot of reasons why they've got this, they've proposed this, and this is a case of TW Projects have done their side of the contract. They've been out to a registered social provider. They have, I'm sorry, Mr. Councillor Hart, you're shaking your head. They went to Social Housing Australia. Social Housing come back to them and said, there, that's fine, but can we use disability housing as the entity to hold this? And so then it's come back to us to say, okay, because of that difference, the officers have said, does that still comply with what you want? We don't know why they've asked for that. There'll be many reasons. It might be where the money is to build these houses. It might be because they can get government funding through NDIS, or it might be that they have information we don't know, which is hence my question to the officer early. What is the need for housing in this community? They might be aware that disability housing is the greatest social housing need right now in this community, which is why they're going, that's their focus. And this is the entity that they do that with through the NDIS funding or whatever. So I think we are potentially imposing a bureaucratic oversight on them for getting an outcome, which talks about Councillor Potter's talk. We were going to lock a particular group out of this for what? It might be social housing, say, well, we don't want to do it at all because we don't have the funding. We don't know. So it'll go to somewhere else. We'll kick it around for a bit longer, as it were. Yeah, look, this 20 or 30 year, this 40 year imposition, that's a bit like putting a will together and trying to reach from the grave. Yeah, do I agree that there should be some time imposition? Yeah, maybe 20, maybe 30. I can't see 40 working. You look at houses built around those 40 years ago, they're starting to fall down, or they had to be renovated 3 or 4 times, especially this type of housing. It does not last. It needs constant upgrade. So this just locks them in. So, and they're a disability housing group. It's what they do. Why are we trying to tell them how to suck eggs?
Thank you, Councillor Arnott. Any other councillor wish to speak? No other councillor wish to speak. Councillor Hart, right of reply.
Yeah, this doesn't lock out housing for disability people. How unrepresentative. It does the opposite. It widens it. It doesn't create an extra layer of bureaucracy. It does the opposite. It says the housing, if it's social housing, that can be channeled at the greatest need, whether that's disabled people, whether it's elderly, whatever the need is. This removes a layer of bureaucracy. You have to wonder why they wouldn't be prepared to do this. We need to remember as councillors who our responsibility is here. It's not to TW Projects. And we've heard that the arrangement they're suggesting doesn't comply with the contract. That's why we're being asked to rubber stamp it. this allows a much better option for the provision of social housing, and the preferences expressed in 4 and 5 are just that, so as to comply with the contract. If we don't do this, if we don't have some sort of minimum period we heard before, the properties could be sold 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, 10 years later. And how absurd to suggest 40 years is too long. We did a planning permit the other day for a house that had a heritage control that had been built sometime in the early 1900s, probably 80 or 90 years old. 40 years is a reasonable period, but there's a lot of houses that were built before 1984 that are still standing. I think it's about time council has considered who they're trying to support here, and I'm always on the side of the community and those in need. And this resolution does what we can within the confines of the poorly worded contract.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. I now have councillors, I'll call for a vote. All those in favour?
Was Councillor Hanson trying to get your attention?
No, I don't think so.
Sorry.
So I'll go back to my request. Councillors, I will now call for a vote. All those in favour? Councillor Hart, Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Costin. All those against? Councillor White. 4, 3, 4.
Division.
Motion's lost. Division. All those in favour? Councillor Hart, Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Costin. Those against? Councillor Potter, Councillor Arnott, Councillor Hanson, Councillor White. We'll go back to the substantive motion.
There isn't one. You need to call from.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Chris
Yeah.
foreshadowed.
Chris, you foreshadowed. Councillor Potter, you foreshadowed an alternate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation to include at the bottom or at the end a period of 30 years, please.
Oh, so a third point on the officer's recommendation.
No,
Ca-
just 3 words at the end.
Or 3 words at the end.
Well, yeah, just add at the end of where it says social housing
Oh, yeah.
for a minimum
Yeah.
period of 30 years.
30 years. Okay, thank you. It's not an extra point. It's just putting a 30 years on the end.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Potter's motion? A seconder? No seconder for Councillor Potter's motion? Councillor Hanson. Is it to be opposed? Councillor Hart. Back to the mover, Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Look, we've heard the arguments in relation to this. I just think we need to get onto the job. I think it's sensible to try and hold on to these houses for a reasonable period so that they remain performing the use that we want them to before, and that is which will be disability housing. I've previously spoken about the need. It's a clear need. If this was just allocated for social housing, which is what it says, but with the provider who's going to potentially enter into agreement with TW Projects, they specialise in disability housing. We need disability housing desperately, and I hope councillors will support this.
Thanks, Councillor Potter. Councillor Hanson?
I'll reserve.
You reserve. Councillor Costin?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, if I may. I would like to ask officers, what if TW Projects Proprietary Limited doesn't agree to enter into a Section 173 agreement, does that mean this will come back to council?
It's not.
Mr. McNeil, can you answer that?
Jesus, this misunderstanding.
Through you, Mayor. If the developer chooses not to enter into an agreement, because there's no requirement in the contract around that, then I'm not sure that it would come back to council, but there wouldn't be a decision to make.
Thank you, Mr. McNeil. Councillor Hanson, you've reserved. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Arnott.
Councillor Mayor White, my understanding is the Section 173 agreement is not something that TW Projects into, it's actually the purchaser of the land enters into. Is that correct? The disability housing. They're the ones that sign that contract with that clause requirement. Because TW Projects have nothing to do with this once a contract's signed.
McNeil, can you answer that question? And then can we get back to the...
Through you, Mayor.
Yeah.
The agreement would need to be entered into with the owner of the land, and whoever that owner is at the time, whether it's TW Projects to then become DHL, or whether it's directly with DHL in the first instance.
Thanks, Mr. McNeil. Councillor Hart, you have your hand up to speak. And then
Well, I have my hand up to move an amendment, and the amendment is to add to point 2 after 30 years, and that council's approval of the arrangement is conditional on this Section 173 agreement for a minimum of 30 years being entered into. Happy for some guidance on the words, but essentially, and it reflects something that Councillor Costin was asking in a question, that your approval to do this other arrangement, essentially, is providing this Section 173 agreement's entered into.
You got a seconder for that amendment?
Not yet.
Not yet. We've got to get it on the screen. Sorry. So we have to vote for the amendment first, don't we? Before we go back to Councillor Potter's.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think Councillor Arnott may have had a question, man.
Your microphone's still muted.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
Councillor Arnott.
Yeah, look, with permission from Councillor Hart, I would like to, if we can, when you've got that, pick up one of those clauses that he had in his other motion, because substantially I actually supported much of his other motion, but to include that about our preferences that we wanted in the first place, just to make it clear what our initial preferences were, because I think that was part of his one of his major intents, to make it clear what our original intent was, and then to go with this, the rest of it, and with what is being proposed now, if that is
Councillor Arnott,
that's appropriate.
the CEO's got a comment to make here.
So thank you, Councillor Arnott, but I think that the process should be to allow Councillor Hart to articulate their amendment and to give our Business Support Officer time to type that, for Councillor Hart to confirm that, and then we can move forward. And Councillor Hart, can I just ask, my understanding is that you wish to have, so if DHL is recognised as appropriate, which is where I think we're at, you want that recognition to be conditional upon there being a 173 agreement. So by deviating from the registered housing provider, Housing Choices Australia, by allowing them to have DHL as the subsidiary instead, that you say only if there is that security through the 173 agreement, is that your intent?
Essentially, yes, because we're told that they
Yes.
need our approval that they can do this. Well, let
That's
them
okay.
do it, but we want the 173.
Yep, that's okay. Can I suggest some wording for you? Would you be comfortable?
I'm always ears ready to hear advice. You know,
Thank you
I
very
do.
You are
Always
nothing
ready
but
to work.
cooperative and open and ready for advice, Councillor Hart. Can I suggest that the wording might be that council recognises DHL, Disability Housing Limited, as an appropriate entity for satisfying the contract of sale on the condition that and then delete up to and including current, that the landowner, you don't need to say who, that the landowner enters a 173 requiring blah, blah, blah. Councillor Hart, is that point reflecting your intent?
Yeah, so my amendment would be to change point 2 to read as you've
That's right.
got it.
Yep. To replace point 2 with the following.
Mayor, I have
So-
a question.
So that is, Councillor Hart, are you comfortable that that's your intent? And then I'll let the chair take back the questions.
Yes.
Thank you.
Replace point 2 with following. Okay. So we've got some questions on the amendment. Councillor Finnegan, I think you had your hand up first.
Actually, I've still got my hand up because I was planning on opposing the.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll bail out at this point. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Potter, I think you had your hand up for a question.
Just some advice as to what happens if they don't, because unless Councillor Hart does want his name up there, I would be happy to alter my motion to include that. But first, I'm curious as to if they don't enter into Section 173 agreement, what happens?
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Potter. I think the CEO's got a comment on that one.
So thank you, Councillor Potter, through the chair. We would put to TW projects that if they don't, then council is not recognising DHL and they should then seek to enter the agreement with Housing Choices Australia or return the land, 3 properties to council at no cost, they returning them back to the contract of sale conditions.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Costin, did you have a question around the amendment?
Thank you, Mayor. The question around the wording related to the landowner. Are we talking about DW projects or are we talking about DHL? And can we be more specific there?
So thank you, Councillor Costin, through the chair. I think this is similar to what Councillor Arnott was seeking to understand. A Section 173 agreement is established between the council, the municipal council, and whoever is the landowner at the time that the agreement is struck and registered on the title. And then that agreement passes with that property from landowner to new landowner each time. It is bound to the land. So if this is struck and bound to the title at the time that TW projects own it, as they currently do, then this would be an agreement struck with TW projects. If they transfer that land to anyone else prior to the agreement, then we would have to negotiate it with the new landowner. So it is whoever is the landowner at the point in time that the agreement is struck and registered, and then passes with the property, not the owners, but with the property thereafter until it is removed formally.
Thank you, CEO. Thank you for the explanation about 173. I fear that if we don't require this of TW projects can sell this property and then we have to, in your words, negotiate with the new landholder. We have no leverage on the new landholder.
Not there you go. CEO.
So through the chair, TW Projects will be the landowner for a good while yet. They have the construction works to complete to the satisfaction of various authorities, including the council, before they can even apply for their statements of compliance. And by which time I would hope we are well progressed in whatever the conversation is. So we have a lot of time before it changes hand, albeit the new titles will need to be, effectively created to put the title on or the register, the agreement on, I accept.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hart, I'd be more comfortable if we nominate TW Projects instead of saying the landholder.
Councillor Hart.
I'd have to take some advice because technically the section 173 is with whoever the landholder is. Through you, Mayor, I'd like to ask the CEO whether it could have some extra words that might strengthen that, such as that TW Projects ensures that this happens or something. I don't know, but
I think
we
through
have
the chair,
some
I think
shared
that by
understanding
making
of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that by making it conditional, that this is required for TW Projects to be satisfying their conditions of the contract. I think that makes it clear that that has to be done. Or then TW Projects would not be complying with the contract in the form approved through the resolution.
Yeah, you got good point, and they have 300,000 reasons to make sure that the agreement's entered into.
They do.
Okay. So I want to confirm that's the amendment. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. Do anyone opposing that amendment? No opposing the amendment. Do anyone else want to speak to the amendment? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, again, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for your assistance with this. We don't have much leverage here. We've been told that, but we do have some. And the leverage is that if they want us to allow them to enter into agreement with this other organisation, that requires our approval. I acknowledge the Section 173 agreement is between the landholder and the council, but TW Projects has 300,000 reasons why they will want to ensure that that is entered into, and that can be negotiated. And I think this is the minimum we can do, at least do this, to try to ensure there's some protection so that at least for 30 years, and I think we have to use what leverage we have, and we do have some leverage. Please do not give it all away.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Councillor Finnegan as the seconder to the amendment.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Seconding Councillor Hart's amendment. Whilst I stated preference for Councillor Hart's previous motion, which was voted down, I feel that, as has been stated, we don't have a lot of leverage left in this situation, but some of the leverage we do have left is that TW Projects are wanting to recognise Disability Housing Limited as an appropriate entity that falls outside of, appropriate entity for the purposes of being a social housing provider. They aren't one, they are a subsidiary thereof. We have the leverage because they're coming to us, asking us to recognise that. As a condition of recognising that, we should be ensuring that these sites, these 3 sites, which we intended to be gifted free of cost to us to be provided to social housing providers, ensuring that while they are now being sold at a cost of about $300,000 to, or are to be, if this amendment and motion passed, to be sold to Disability Housing Limited, who are a subsidiary of a social housing provider, for these lots are to be sold to them. But the condition of that is that these lots under a Section 173 agreement will be used for social housing for a minimum period of 30 years. And I think that at the very least, if we're in this position, this is what the community's expectation would be, that we support this and that we get this outcome moving forward, and that we learn the lessons of what's happened during the during this saga. I guess, you know, mistakes have been made, and it's not always a bad thing to. I know there's a reluctance of organisations, including councils or businesses or whoever, to admit they made mistakes. But if you don't admit you've made mistakes, you don't learn from them. You continue to bury and you don't move on. So I'm glad we've admitted that we made a mistake here, and this is part of us trying to rectify that. And I support this amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Finnegan. Anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, councillors, I have an amendment in front of us. I'll now call for a vote. Those in favour? Those against? Carried 7-0. So we go back to the motion. Councillor Hanson, I think you'd reserved. Anyone else wish to speak to the amended motion? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'll be brief. I may even support this amended motion. It really seems to be a choice between not very good and a little bit better. At least this is something, but somewhere along the line, this council has to sort out the way this was handled. It's a really poor situation that it has got to this. But I'll be listening to the other people who speak, and I might just fall over the line in support.
It's Councillor Hart. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mayor White. Look, there's been commentary that we've only just learnt tonight about the problems with this contract and with the proposed buyers, and that I don't accept that. We've had these conversations a number of times before, and many of the answers I've heard tonight are the same that I've heard, same information I've heard before. But I do actually agree with the concerns that Councillor Hart has expressed. And I thank him for the amendment that's been added to this motion, and I support that in this context, that we need to do have something which is the minimum, and I actually thank him for having the capacity to think that through and to provide some way forward with this. I think that in the future, this concept, and I know it's not what we agreed to, the councillors feel they agreed to in the first place, and I'm not going to dispute that. But this idea of providing social housing where the initial cost of the providing of the services, say it's 100K, to build the roads, put the services on, is then covered in that cost that the social housing is then sold to whoever's going to do the social housing projects, is not a bad concept to use with developers going forward. Otherwise, what we're doing is adding the cost of that to the land for others to buy, families who want a block of land to buy in a normal circumstance. So I think we just need to consider that as a way going forward, but otherwise I support this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Anyone else wish to speak? I'm aware that Councillor Hanson has to get moving and has reserved, so can we keep it? Anyone else? Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Mayor. Like Councillor Hart here, you know, whilst I didn't support the motion as it was originally put up by Councillor Potter, and I'm still, you know, I supported Councillor Hart's amendment, and, you know, while I'm still uncomfortable with what's transpired in the history of the sale of Bruce Street, I supported the amendment. I'll support the amended motion, really, because sometimes on council, all we're able to do, we're backed into a corner, and all we're able to do is make a bad situation just that little bit less bad. And I think that this is one of those times where we don't want the imperfect to become the enemy of the perfect, and the imperfect is better than something that's just completely unpalatable. So I'm supporting. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Finnegan. Councillor Hanson, you reserved?
Yes, I did, and I will be leaving after we vote on this motion. Firstly, I just want to say that seems to be a lot of negativity around this discussion and the Bruce Street sale. The Bruce Street sale is actually a very positive outcome for this community. It's, you know, releasing the sale of a piece of council land to be developed into all types of housing, which the town so desperately needs. There seems to be some disagreement between councillors around the social housing outcome that was sought, and whether we were to be provided with the blocks at no cost or at a different outcome. But what we've got is that what's in the contract is what the developer has signed on to, what they're dealing with, and I certainly support it. I certainly support the developer and what they're trying to do with Bruce Street. I think it will be fantastic to get a social housing outcome. And like I have said all along with this project, we cannot solve all the problems of the world with 3 blocks for social housing. You know, if the social housing developer or the social housing provider it's for people with disabilities, then that is a fantastic outcome. What it says is that, you know, there's a much bigger problem, and that 3 blocks won't solve all the problems, but it will go a little way, and it's a very positive outcome. So I want to remove the negativity that seems to be in this virtual room that we're in. This is very, very positive for the Colac-Otway Shire. I'm certainly proud to be associated with it, and I will be supporting this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Hanson. So, councillors, I will now
Chris doesn't.
call. Chris, write a reply. Councillor Potter, did you want to write a reply?
Yes, I do, if I may, Mayor.
Councillor
Thank
Potter.
you.
Thank you.
I'll be as quick as I can. Thank you, Councillor Hanson, for reminding us what we're doing here. And it is a very, very positive story. And I hope this experience with TW projects doesn't put them off from working with officers on their next development in Colac to try and achieve a similar outcome for more social housing blocks at the will of the developer, the goodwill of the developer. That's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Potter. Councillors, I will now call for a vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried 7-0. Thanks, councillors. Thank you, Councillor Hanson, for joining us and putting a positive note at the end.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep moving. We've got a few more to go. We're up to item 9.15, Colac Visitor Information Centre Road Reserve issue. The purpose of this report is to seek a resolution from Council to undertake the process to change the classification of a section of land where the Colac Visitor Information Centre sits from road reserve to unreserved government land. Councillors, before I ask for a motion, do any councillors wish to ask a question of officers? Oh, yes. Councillor Hart?
Yes, Mayor. Well, I'm not asking a question. I'm moving a procedural motion. I'm really uncomfortable with the fact that Councillor Hanson is effectively excluded from the meeting. We've got more than half a dozen items, and so I'm moving that this meeting be adjourned to a time and date to be fixed, although I'd suggest that next Wednesday would probably be a good time.
Do I have a seconder for Councillor Hart's motion to adjourn?
Don't think you need it. It's a procedural motion. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It's a motion that we adjourn.
Just one second.
Can we just, I'm just getting some advice. Thank you.
Treat it like an option.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hart. We've got a second to Councillor Finnegan. Do I have anyone to oppose the motion? No one to oppose. Councillor Arnott, you're opposing?
May I
You're
ask
on
a
mute.
question of Executive, please?
We have got a question in relation to this procedural motion.
If that's okay.
Yep, go ahead.
Just asking the Executive, is there anything within the agenda items now which must be dealt with in an urgent matter between now and, say, Wednesday, the next 2 weeks?
About the contract.
So I'll just thank you through the chair. I'll just need to check with my relevant general managers that neither of the contracts are going to be problematic if deferred further. So my understanding, General Manager of Corporate Services, is that the provision of labour hire is covered until the end of March, and I understand that, well, the other one's just about getting our capital works delivered. So do my general managers have any comment about a concern on the contracts?
Through you, Mayor, I might start. No issues from me in regards to the reconstruction of Forest Street.
Okay.
Through you, Mayor, no concern from me in relation to the contract for labour hire services.
Okay. Debate.
Okay, so we've got a motion that Councillor Hart's moved that we adjourn. We've got a seconder in Councillor Finnegan. Am I correct, Councillor Arnott, you're opposing?
No, I didn't say I was opposing. I just asked the question.
Oh, sorry, yeah, okay. So, Councillor Hart, do you wish to speak?
Well, I've got a question really in my own motion. Do you need some more wriggle room in that or other time as approved by the Mayor in case you might find that the following Wednesday is more convenient? Because I'm eager to work with everybody, so do you need some wriggle room?
So through the chair to councillors, our 6th of March day is a briefing day. We have external delegates. And if this is to be scheduled, we'd like to have you confirm the time, please. If it's to be the following week, we currently have a special council meeting at 1:30 on the 13th of March and a planning committee already scheduled for the 4 p.m. on the 13th of March. So again, if you're adjourning until that day, I'd like a clear understanding of time and day.
Well, my key issue is that we adjourn. I just think it's unfair that Councillor Hanson's, weren't unable to be here in this situation. So, do you want me to just put it a time to be determined? I'm reluctant to put a time. I don't have in front of me every schedule for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I think what's up there is good enough. Adjourn to Wednesday, the 6th of March, or other time is approved by the Mayor.
But just interested in how many items we might have at the planning meeting, because that might be the day.
Sorry, CEO?
No, do the debate.
Do the debate?
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Hart, did you want to add anything further?
Oh, not really. I think it's poor that and this is not a reflection on Councillor Hanson in the circumstances, but it's poor that Councillor Hanson be excluded from these items. I think if this does get lost, that we should deal with the items that are less perhaps somewhat more routine, which I would have thought would be 19, 20, 21 and 22 and maybe 10.1. But it's just not fair to the community that they don't have full representation, particularly when, in this situation, I don't think it's Councillor Hanson's fault that she wasn't able to stay for the remainder of a meeting on a Friday.
Councillor Hart, seconder. Councillor Finnegan.
Yeah, I think I should. I agree with Councillor Hart here, and if I could have a bit of levity to just say that for those who aren't aware, the reason this meeting has occurred is due to myself. So just in the interests of destigmatising what's happened. Wednesday.
We're actually
I'll
talking about the motion at the moment.
Yeah,
Councillor
I'm
Finnegan.
explaining why.
So you're seconding the motion to
Yeah,
adjourn.
and I'm explaining why I'm seconding is because the only reason we're having this meeting is because I had a mental health emergency which required the postponement of the meeting on Wednesday evening, the attendance of emergency services. So that's why we're in this situation. I feel it's unfair on, as I said, on Councillor Hanson. Councillor Hanson should, due to scheduling, this going a little bit longer, be unable to attend this meeting. And really, it is my fault. And I'd just like to say I apologise to councillors for putting us in this situation. Any embarrassment caused due to my illness. So I'll be supporting this postponement motion.
Any other councillors wish to speak? I'll put them.
I'm sorry, Marg, if I did have my microphone still on. I hope it wasn't coming over unintended. I'm just sort of thinking about this and looking through the agenda. I'm a bit either way, but most of the items on this agenda I think are relatively straightforward. Like we have to deal with the Visitor Information Centre and the contract and all that sort of stuff. And I am sympathetic for Councillor Hart's concerns, but there's always going to be times when not all councillors potentially can get to meetings. This is unusual, but we need to obviously deal with business in whatever circumstances as they are. I'd prefer we continue for at least some time to get some of these things off the table, the most important things.
Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Anyone else wish to speak? I'll put it to the vote then. Councillors, we've got a motion before us to adjourn the meeting. Those in favour? Those against? Carried 4-2. Meeting's adjourned. And I will now formally close the meeting. Thanks, councillors, for your patience and time this afternoon. It's difficult late on a Friday afternoon. And to those that have joined us online, we will advise when the next meeting is to complete this agenda.